Imagine holding an ancient artifact that defies the laws of physics, or staring at a geographical scar where the Earth itself seems to have melted under a fire that no known technology of the era could produce. For centuries, the Bible has stood as a text of profound faith, but it is also a historical chronicle of events so anomalous, so utterly disruptive to the natural order, that modern science remains completely paralyzed in their presence. We are not talking about simple metaphors or allegories. We are talking about physical anomalies, celestial disruptions, and archaeological enigmas that have been subjected to the most advanced laboratory testing, carbon dating, and satellite imaging available to humanity, only to leave the world's leading minds completely baffled. From a day when the sun literally froze in the sky, to a burial cloth embedded with an impossible three-dimensional image, science has tried to debunk, explain away, or rationalize these occurrences. Yet, the deeper the empirical data goes, the more the natural explanations crumble. The Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is perhaps the most intensely studied artifact in human history, a 14-foot strip of linen bearing the faint, ghostly image of a crucified man. For decades, skeptics pointed to a 1988 radiocarbon dating test that claimed the cloth was a medieval forgery from the 14th century. However, that conclusion has completely unraveled under modern scrutiny. Laboratories later revealed that the samples tested were taken from a corner of the shroud that had been repaired and rewoven by medieval nuns after a fire, meaning scientists accidentally dated a mixture of medieval cotton and ancient linen. Men's Journal 1. When researchers looked past the carbon dating, they encountered a series of microscopic and genetic realities that science cannot replicate. Recent advanced DNA and metagenomic analyses have revealed that the shroud is covered in a diverse mosaic of ancient biological footprints. Crucially, a significant portion of the human DNA isolated from the linen belongs to rare haplogroups native entirely to the Near East, particularly matching populations in the Levant. Even more astonishing is the cloth's microbiome. Scientists discovered the presence of halophilic archaea, microorganisms that thrive only in environments with extreme salt concentrations, specifically matching the unique environmental conditions of the Dead Sea region. Catholic World Report 2. Yet, the true barrier for science is the image itself. The faint amber imprint of the man is not made of pigment, ink, dye, or stain. It is entirely superficial, penetrating only the topmost microfibers of the flax threads, a depth of less than 1/100th of the diameter of a human hair. There are no signs of capillary action or chemical bleeding, which would be present if any liquid or paint had been used. Furthermore, the image contains detailed three-dimensional data. When processed through modern imaging software, the intensity of the shading correlates precisely with the distance between a body and a draped cloth, producing a perfect, undistorted 3D relief. The only way modern physicists have ever been able to replicate even a fraction of this superficial coloration is by using ultra-high-power vacuum ultraviolet laser pulses, a technology requiring billions of watts of localized energy. To suggest a medieval artist achieved this without leaving a single trace of pigment or brushstroke is scientifically absurd. Science can tell us where the cloth has been, what plants brushed against it, and whose blood stains its fibers, but when asked how a perfect, anatomically flawless photographic negative was seared onto an ancient linen cloth without scorching the fabric, the laboratories fall completely silent. Joshua's long day. In the book of Joshua, a military commander stands on a battlefield and utters a command that defies cosmic mechanics. He commands the sun to stand still over Gibeon and the moon over the valley of Ajalon. According to the text, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. To the modern scientific mind, this event presents an immediate physical paradox. If the Earth stopped rotating on its axis for 24 hours, the sudden deceleration would cause catastrophic kinetic consequences. The oceans would rush toward the poles in monstrous tsunamis, the atmosphere would continue moving at supersonic speeds, scouring the crust clean, and the tectonic plates would shatter under the immense momentum. Faced with this impossibility, astronomers and historians have tried to find alternative explanations. Some argue the text describes a profound solar eclipse, pointing to a ring-like eclipse that occurred in the region around 1207 BCE. While an eclipse can cause sudden darkness, it lasts for mere minutes, not an extra 24 hours, and it does not halt the apparent movement of the sun. Others suggest it was a rare optical phenomenon known as a light miracle, where atmospheric refraction caused by ice crystals could keep the sun's image visible long after it had physically set below the horizon. However, these theories fail to address the global historical record. If the sun truly behaved erratically on that ancient day, the anomaly should have been witnessed by other civilizations on the opposite side of the planet. Intriguingly, historical mythologies from ancient Mesoamerica, Peru, and China all contain independent, ancestral memories of a bizarre cosmic event. Aztec and Inca legends speak of a terrifyingly long night where the sun refused to rise for an entire day, while ancient Chinese chronicles from the reign of Emperor Yao record a miraculous period where the sun did not set for several days, causing widespread panic. How can cultures separated by vast oceans, with no contact or shared theological framework, describe the exact same chronological disruption, one witnessing an unnaturally extended day, and the other experiencing an unnaturally prolonged night? Science can construct models of planetary physics and orbital mechanics, but it cannot explain how an ancient event left an identical chronological scar across the historical memory of the entire world, leaving us to wonder what cosmic or supernatural force temporarily rewrote the laws of inertia. The Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was far more than a sacred container for the Ten Commandments. It was described as an object of immense, terrifying physical power. According to biblical accounts, anyone who touched the ark without proper preparation was instantly struck dead, as if hit by a violent discharge of energy. When the Israelites carried it across the Jordan River, the waters parted, and when it was marched around the walls of Jericho, the fortifications crumbled. For centuries, rationalists dismissed these descriptions as mythological exaggerations. However, when modern engineers and physicists look at the exact construction specifications of the ark as detailed in the Book of Exodus, they find something startling. The ark was a chest made of acacia wood, lined both inside and outside with pure gold, and topped with a solid gold lid featuring 2 golden cherubim. In the language of electrical engineering, this is a literal blueprint for a powerful, primitive capacitor. Gold is one of the most efficient electrical conductors known to science, while wood acts as an exceptional insulator, or dielectric material. By lining an insulating wooden box with conducting gold sheets on both sides, the ark would naturally accumulate and store a massive static electrical charge from the dry, friction-heavy desert air of the Sinai Peninsula. The golden cherubim on top would act as electrodes. If the ark became highly charged, anyone who stepped forward to touch it would bridge the gap to the ground, triggering an instantaneous, lethal high-voltage discharge. Yet, while this engineering breakdown explains the potential for deadly electrical phenomena, it completely fails to explain the conscious, intelligent behavior attributed to the ark. A simple static capacitor cannot systematically bring down the stone walls of a fortified city, nor can it selectively strike down specific individuals while sparing others who stood inches away. More perplexing still is its complete and utter disappearance from the historical record. When the Babylonians sacked Jerusalem in 586 BCE, they meticulously catalogued every valuable item they plundered from Solomon's temple, down to the smallest silver spoons. Yet, the ark, the most valuable and sacred object in the kingdom, is never mentioned. It vanished without a trace, and despite millennia of searching, satellite scanning, and archaeological excavations, its whereabouts remain a profound void that science cannot locate or explain. The fall of Jericho. The Battle of Jericho is one of the most famous siege stories in human history. The biblical text claims that after the Israelites marched around the city for 7 days blowing ram's horns, the people raised a great shout, and the massive stone walls collapsed flat into the earth, allowing the army to march straight into the city. For generations, secular archaeologists maintained that Jericho was an unfortified settlement, or that the story was a pure fabrication because the dates did not align. That narrative changed dramatically when archaeologist John Garstang, and later Kathleen Kenyon and Bryant Wood, excavated the site of Tel Es Sultan, the ancient location of Jericho. What they uncovered in the dirt stunned the archaeological community. The excavations revealed that ancient Jericho was protected by an exceptionally sophisticated fortification system. It featured a massive stone retaining wall at least 12 feet high, topped by a mud brick wall that extended another 20 feet into the air. When these walls fell, they did not fall inward, as would happen during a standard military siege where battering rams or siege towers push walls into a city. Instead, the mud brick walls collapsed completely outward. In doing so, the fallen bricks formed a literal ramp against the stone retaining wall, perfectly matching the biblical description that the attackers were able to climb straight up and over the fortifications. Furthermore, archaeologists found that the city had not been starved out by a long siege. The storage jars were discovered completely full of grain, indicating the city fell rapidly, just days after the spring harvest. But what caused the walls to fall outward simultaneously? The standard scientific hypothesis is that a perfectly timed earthquake struck the Jordan Rift Valley, destabilizing the foundations of Jericho at the exact moment the Israelites shouted. While a seismic event is a plausible mechanism for architectural collapse, it introduces a probability problem that science cannot resolve. Earthquakes do not wait for a 7-day ritual to conclude, nor do they selectively target the outer defensive walls of a single city while leaving the inner residential structures relatively intact, and they certainly do not construct perfect military ramps for an invading army. The physical evidence in the dirt confirms the structural reality of the collapse, but the uncanny, precise timing of that collapse remains entirely outside the boundaries of natural science. The Star of Bethlehem. The Gospel of Matthew records a celestial anomaly that guided a group of Eastern Magi to the birthplace of Jesus. This star did not behave like any standard stellar object. It appeared in the east, traveled across the sky, and uniquely drifted south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, eventually coming to a complete stop directly over the specific house where the child lay. For centuries, astronomers have tried to match this account with known cosmic events. One of the most popular scientific explanations, popularized by Johannes Kepler, is that the star was a rare series of planetary conjunctions. In 7 BCE, Jupiter and Saturn came into close alignment 3 times in the constellation Pisces, creating a single, exceptionally bright point of light in the night sky. Other astronomers suggest the Magi witnessed a spectacular supernova, the violent explosion of a distant star, or a passing comet, pointing to Chinese astronomical records that note a bright, tailed object in the sky around 5 BCE. While these astronomical events are historically real, none of them fit the behavior described in the narrative. A planetary conjunction, a supernova, or a comet moves across the celestial sphere in accordance with the Earth's rotation. They are millions of miles away. They cannot guide travelers down a specific mountain road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, a distance of only 6 miles, and then make a sharp turn to hover stationary over a single residence. To a person standing on Earth, any celestial body in the upper atmosphere appears to move across the sky as the hours pass. For an object to remain fixed over a specific building, it would have to be an atmospheric phenomenon operating within the Earth's troposphere, or an object capable of intelligent, controlled navigation. By trying to reduce the Star of Bethlehem to a simple planet or comet, science creates a direct contradiction with the physical behavior recorded by ancient observers. It remains a light that science can track through historical calculations, but can never truly define. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is described in the book of Genesis as a sudden, catastrophic act of divine judgment. The text states that the Lord rained brimstone and fire from heaven, completely obliterating the cities, the entire plain, all the inhabitants, and everything that grew on the ground. For millennia, this was considered a moral parable rather than a historical reality. ASH.com. In recent years, attention turned to an archaeological site north of the Dead Sea called Tal el-Hammam, which many scholars believe to be the true location of ancient Sodom. Archaeologists digging through the Middle Bronze Age layers discovered a massive, 1.5 meter thick layer of ash, carbon, and complete destruction. Within this layer, researchers found shocking physical anomalies, pottery shards that had been melted on the outside into green glass, mud bricks that had liquefied, and human bones that had been blasted into tiny fragments. ASH.com initial scientific studies proposed a sensational theory, a cosmic airburst, similar to the 1908 Tunguska event in Russia, where a meteor exploded in the atmosphere over the Jordan Valley. The study argued that this explosion generated temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, unleashing a shockwave that leveled the city in seconds and raining down superheated salt from the Dead Sea, rendering the agricultural land useless for generations. YouTube, however, this scientific consensus quickly collapsed into intense academic controversy. Peer reviewers found significant errors in the data, leading to formal retractions of the airburst paper. Other geologists and archaeologists pointed out that the melted materials could have been caused by intense warfare or ancient pottery kills, noting that similar destruction layers exist across the ancient Near East from military campaigns. With the cosmic airburst theory heavily discredited, science is left back at square one. The physical evidence at the site remains undeniably bizarre. A thriving, heavily fortified urban center was instantly wiped off the map, its buildings flattened, and its population obliterated by a heat so intense it mimics modern thermal weaponry. Yet, science can no longer confidently point to a meteor or a comet to explain it. The physical trauma in the soil of the Jordan Valley is real, but the natural mechanism behind it has slipped through the fingers of modern geology. Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. The parting of the Red Sea. The exodus of the Israelites from Egypt reaches its dramatic climax at the shores of the Red Sea, where, trapped between Pharaoh's advancing chariots and a deep expanse of water, Moses stretches out his hand. The biblical text states that a strong east wind blew all night, turning the sea into dry land, with the waters forming a wall on their right and on their left. Oceanographers and meteorologists have spent decades attempting to simulate this event using advanced computer fluid dynamics. A famous study by the National Center for Atmospheric Research used coastal topography models to demonstrate a phenomenon known as wind setback. The researchers showed that if a sustained wind blew at 63 miles per hour for 12 hours over a specific shallow lagoon in the Nile Delta, it could theoretically push the water back, exposing a muddy ridge of land for a brief window of time before the wind died down and the water rushed back. While this model proves that wind can manipulate shallow water, it falls short of explaining the actual biblical narrative. 63-mile-per-hour winds are equivalent to a Category 1 hurricane. Under such conditions, human beings, livestock, and children would find it physically impossible to walk in a straight line, let alone cross a muddy basin with carts and baggage. Furthermore, the wind setback model requires a shallow, localized marshy area, whereas the text describes deep waters capable of completely swallowing an entire professional army of Egyptian charioteers. The computer models also fail to account for the structural description of the water forming a literal vertical wall on either side of the escape corridor. Fluid dynamics dictate that water naturally seeks its own level. Wind can push water horizontally, but it cannot hold water up as a static, vertical wall without an external, binding force. Science can simulate the movement of air and waves, but it cannot explain how a howling storm could act as a precision surgical instrument, carving open a safe, dry highway through deep waters for a fleeing nation, only to collapse it instantly when the pursuers entered the trap. The 10th plague of Egypt. The plagues of Egypt are often analyzed by secular scientists as a domino effect of ecological disasters. They argue that an eruption of a volcano or an algal bloom in the Nile could have turned the river red, driving frogs onto the land, which died and bred swarms of lice and flies, subsequently spreading disease among livestock and causing boils on human skin. Even the darkness is explained as a massive, localized sandstorm. However, this ecological chain reaction completely falls apart when it reaches the 10th and final plague, the targeted death of the firstborn. According to the text, in a single night, every firstborn male in Egypt died, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the livestock, while the households of the Israelites were entirely untouched. Desperate to find a medical or natural explanation, some epidemiologists suggested a theory involving toxic mold. They argued that after the previous plagues of hail and locusts, the remaining grain supplies in Egyptian storehouses became damp and infested with a lethal fungus that produced deadly mycotoxins. Because firstborn sons in Egyptian culture were traditionally given double portions of food and ate first, they would have consumed a lethal dose of the contaminated grain, while younger siblings ate from uncontaminated layers. This theory, while creative, is scientifically unsustainable. Toxic mold does not distribute itself uniformly across an entire nation's food supply in a single day. More importantly, it does not explain how the toxin could selectively kill the firstborn males among animals and livestock, who do not follow human cultural rules of primogeniture or double food portions. An airborne pathogen or a foodborne toxin cannot read a family tree. It cannot distinguish between an older brother and a younger brother, nor can it selectively bypass households that had marked their doorposts with blood. The extreme specificity of the 10th plague defies every known law of epidemiology and pathology, remaining a targeted strike that medical science cannot categorize. The longevity of the antediluvian patriarchs in the early chapters of Genesis, the text presents a genealogy that reads like an biological impossibility. The individuals who lived before the Great Flood are recorded as having lifespans that stretch across nearly a millennium. Adam is said to have lived 930 years, Noah lived 950 years, and Methuselah reached an astonishing 969 years. Following the flood, the biblical narrative shows a rapid, exponential decline in human lifespans, dropping to a maximum of around 120 years by the time of Moses. To modern biology, these numbers are absolute fantasy. Our understanding of human senescence is governed by the Hayflick limit, the cellular reality that human cells can only divide a finite number of times, typically between 40 and 60 times, before the telomeres at the ends of our chromosomes degrade completely, leading to cellular death and systemic aging. Biologists have attempted to explain the ancient numbers through cultural or linguistic errors. A common theory is that the ancient writers used a different calendar system, perhaps confusing months with years. If you divide Methuselah's 969 years by a lunar cycle of 12 months, his age becomes a perfectly reasonable 78 years. However, when you apply this mathematical adjustment to the rest of the genealogy, the theory completely self-destructs. If the word year actually means month, then Enoch would have fathered his son Methuselah when he was only 5.5 years old, and Mahalalel would have become a father at the age of 5. If we accept the text as written, modern geneticists are left with a profound biological puzzle. Some researchers have posited that if early human DNA was pristine, entirely free from the thousands of years of accumulated genetic mutations, environmental toxins, and viral degradation that plague modern humanity, the human body might have possessed a fundamentally different cellular efficiency. Yet, we have no physical tissue or ancient DNA samples from that era to verify such a state. To modern medical science, the human body is a machine designed to wear out within a century. The idea of an individual living through nearly 1,000 changes of the seasons remains an evolutionary and biological anomaly that science cannot replicate or fully comprehend. The resurrection, every mystery, every miracle, and every unexplained anomaly in the biblical text ultimately converges on a single morning in Jerusalem, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. According to the narrative, a man who had been subjected to the full, brutal efficiency of Roman execution, beaten, scourged, pierced with a spear, and pronounced dead by professional executioners, was wrapped in burial linens and sealed inside a stone tomb guarded by Roman soldiers. On the third day, the tomb was empty, and the man was seen alive by hundreds of eyewitnesses over a period of 40 days. Science has launched every conceivable intellectual assault against this claim. The oldest skeptical theory is the swoon hypothesis, which argues that Jesus did not actually die on the cross but merely fainted from blood loss and exhaustion. The cool, damp air of the tomb supposedly revived him, allowing him to push away the multi-ton stone, overpower the Roman guards, and convince his disciples he had conquered death. From a medical standpoint, this theory is entirely impossible. Roman scourging routinely exposed bare muscle and skeletal structures, causing severe hypovolemic shock. Crucifixion itself kills through asphyxiation. Once a person can no longer push themselves up to breathe, suffocation is absolute. Furthermore, the Roman soldier's spear thrust into Jesus' side resulted in an immediate flow of blood and water, a distinct medical indicator of pericardial and pleural effusion, proving beyond any clinical doubt that his heart had failed. Other scientists and psychologists have proposed the hallucination theory, suggesting that the disciples were so consumed by grief that they suffered massive, collective visual and auditory hallucinations. However, modern psychiatry knows that hallucinations are deeply personal, subjective internal experiences, like dreams. They do not occur collectively to large groups of people simultaneously, nor do they last for weeks, and they certainly do not manifest as a tangible, physical entity that can cook breakfast on a lakeshore and invite people to physically touch its wounds. Most damaging of all to any naturalistic theory is the physical reality of the empty tomb itself. If the resurrection was a hallucination or a myth invented by the disciples, the Roman authorities or the Jewish leadership could have instantly crushed the movement by simply producing the decomposing body of Jesus. Yet, despite having every political, military, and religious motivation to do so, no body was ever found, and no counter-evidence was ever produced. Science is built entirely on the observation of repeatable, natural laws, and chief among those laws is that life gives way to death, and death is an irreversible state. The resurrection stands as a singular, monumental exception to the most fundamental law of biology, a moment where history shifted, and science was left staring into a void it can neither measure, fill, nor explain. If you want to dive deeper into how modern technology interacts with ancient history, check out this fascinating analysis of the Shroud of Turin's DNA and history. This video provides an excellent visual and scientific breakdown of how recent genetic mapping has traced the cloth's journey through the Middle East, offering a compelling look at the ongoing dialogue between modern science and ancient artifacts.